The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns of Oakwood Estates, an upscale enclave in Columbus, Ohio. It was the kind of place where every blade of grass stood at attention. Driveways were blacktop perfection, and the sidewalks were so pristine you could eat off them. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant bark of a pampered pooch or the whisper of a luxury sedan gliding down the street. 16-year-old Regina Walker adjusted the strap of his gym bag, earbuds blasting music that walled off the world. He was beat. Basketball practice at Northwood High had been a killer. Hours of drills after a full day of classes. Usually he'd hop on the school bus, but today he decided to cut through Oakwood. It wasn't exactly foreign territory. His buddy lived just a few blocks over. But he also knew, deep down, this wasn't a neighborhood where folks expected to see someone like him strolling alone. Inside one of those picture-perfect homes, behind a sprawling bay window, eyes were watching. Karen Thompson had lived in Oakwood Estates for 15 years. She knew every face, every car, every routine on her block. And right now, something felt off. A teenage boy, black, tall, athletic build, walking solo, a bag slung over his shoulder. A flicker of unease, or was it something else, prickled her skin. Karen reached for her phone, then hesitated. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe he had every right to be here. But doubt, like a persistent weed, started to take root. What if he was up to no good? What if she ignored it, and later that night, she saw a news report about a break-in, just a few houses down? A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Better safe than sorry, right? Karen took a shaky breath and punched in 911. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. She kept her eyes glued to Jaden. As she spoke to the dispatcher, her fingers clenching the phone a little too tight. He's walking down my street kinda looking around like he's casing houses. I don't recognize him and he's carrying a bag. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Can you describe him, ma'am? Karen's lips tightened. He's, tall, black, wearing a hoodie, gym shorts, has a bag. I don't know, but it just doesn't look right. The dispatcher followed protocol. Is the young man doing anything illegal at this time? Karen faltered. Well, no, not exactly, but I've never seen him before. This is a very quiet neighborhood. In her mind, that was explanation enough. The dispatcher assured her officers would be dispatched to check it out. Karen hung up, still fixated on Jaden as he paused briefly to switch tracks on his playlist, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in his wake. A few blocks away, Officers Miller and Davis were cruising in their squad car when the call crackled over the radio. Possible prowler, Oakwood Estates, male, black, mid-teens carrying a bag. Miller, a stocky veteran with 15 years on the force, exchanged a look with Davis, younger, still eager to prove himself. Let's roll, Miller grunted. They flicked on their lights and siren, tires spitting gravel as they sped toward Oakwood. Jaden was 2 blocks from home when he heard it, the piercing wail of a police siren closing in fast. He turned, confusion clouding his face, just as the squad car screeched to a halt. Doors flew open. Hey, stop right there! Jaden froze, yanking out his earbuds. 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. What's in the bag? Miller barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Jaden blinked, bewildered. Gym stuff. My basketball gear. Where you headed? Davis stepped closer, his gaze intense. Home, Jaden replied, his voice steady despite the sudden tightness in his chest. He knew instinctively this wasn't just a casual chat. You live around here? Miller scoffed, suspicion dripping from his tone. Yeah, a few blocks over. That right? Miller's eyes narrowed. Address. Jaden started to answer, but before he could, Davis snatched his gym bag. Hey! That's my stuff! Jaden protested, a flash of anger igniting within him. Relax, Miller muttered, yanking the zipper open and rummaging through the contents. Sneakers, a sweat-soaked jersey, a water bottle. Nothing remotely suspicious, but Miller wasn't finished. Why? You cutting through this neighborhood? Miller demanded, his voice laced with accusation. Jaden's heart hammered against his ribs. It's just a shortcut. I'm not doing anything wrong. Davis glanced at Miller, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe he's telling the truth. Miller remained unmoved, his gaze fixed on Jaden. Then why'd someone call the cops on him? Jaden opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He noticed something over the officer's shoulders, a sleek, black SUV rolling slowly towards them. It pulled up sharply, stopping inches from the squad car. The doors swung open. Out stepped Councilwoman Regina Walker. But the officers had no clue who they'd just stopped, and neither did Karen, still peering from her window. The air seemed to crackle the moment Regina Walker emerged from the SUV. She wasn't just any mother. She was a prominent figure in Columbus politics, and she carried herself with the unmistakable aura of authority. Dressed in a tailored power suit and heels that clicked decisively on the pavement, she moved with purpose, not running, not panicked, but in complete control. A woman accustomed to walking into rooms where people underestimated her and swiftly correcting their mistake. Her eyes locked onto the two officers hovering over her son. Miller's posture stiffened as she approached. He'd seen her face on TV at city council meetings, but it took a beat for his brain to register the reality of the moment. Davis, younger and less seasoned, was the first to speak, his voice wavering slightly. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation." Regina didn't flinch. "Oh, I see that." Her voice was smooth yet sharp enough to cut through steel. "And what exactly is the situation?" Jaden exhaled, a wave of relief washing over him. "Mom," she raised a hand, a silent, "I got this message" that calmed him instantly. Miller cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area." Regina's eyebrow arched, a silent challenge. "Suspicious?" Davis gestured, vaguely towards Jaden. "We stopped him to ask some questions, ma'am. We need to confirm if he actually lives here." Regina let out a slow, measured breath, the kind that warned a storm was brewing. Then, with deliberate movements, she pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and held it up for them to see. "That's my son." On the screen, Jaden's student ID blazed, complete with their home address and a photo of the two of them at a community event just last month. Silence descended, thick and heavy. Davis shifted uncomfortably. Miller's jaw tightened, his face flushing a dull red. Regina wasn't finished. "So tell me, officers, did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" Neither officer dared to answer. Behind them, Karen stood frozen in her doorway, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. She'd recognized Regina the instant she stepped out of the SUV, and the moment she connected the dots, the councilwoman, the son, her call, a wave of nausea crashed over her. She had called the cops on a prominent figure's son. She had called the police on a kid who was simply walking home. And now she was trapped, watching as a mother, a powerful woman, stared down two officers who suddenly seemed to have lost their voices. But the officer's silence didn't mean Regina was done talking. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her gaze locked on them. The air crackled with tension, everyone holding their breath, waiting to see what this formidable woman would do next. She didn't raise her voice. No yelling, no cursing, none of that. She didn't need to. Her voice was steady, precise, each word a carefully aimed dart. "You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong." Miller squared his shoulders, attempting to salvage his authority. "We were just following procedure, Councilwoman." Regina tilted her head slightly, a hint of disdain in her eyes. "Procedure?" Davis shuffled his feet, visibly uncomfortable. "We got a call about a suspicious person, ma'am." Regina took another step closer. "A teenage boy walking home." Neither officer had a response. The silence hung heavy, thick, with unspoken truths. Jaden rubbed his hands together, the sting of being treated like a criminal still burning in his gut. Regina turned, finally fixing her gaze directly on Karen, still a statue in her doorway. "Was it you?" she asked, her voice quiet but laced with steel. Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. The weight of the moment crushed her. She hadn't meant for this to escalate. She hadn't thought it would go this far. She wasn't racist, she told herself, desperately. She was just being cautious. But now, staring at this mother who had clearly dropped everything, raced into her own neighborhood, and stood like a lioness defending her cub from the police, over nothing. Karen's face flushed. Crimson, she swallowed hard. I just thought... Regina cut her off, her voice unwavering. "You thought what?" Karen had no answer. No explanation that wouldn't expose the ugly truth she'd been trying to deny. Regina's gaze didn't waver. "Do you know what could have happened here, Ms.?" She paused, waiting for Karen to fill in the blank. "Thompson," Karen whispered, the name barely audible. "Ms. Thompson," Regina repeated, the name hanging in the air like an accusation. Jaden could have been tackled, arrested, slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. Her voice dropped, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Shot. And all because a woman who has lived in the same house for 15 years decided that the sight of a black teenager with a gym bag was enough to dial 911. Regina didn't need to spell it out. Karen already knew. The officers knew it too. But instead of an apology, Miller shifted his weight, his tone dismissive. "If there's no issue here, councilwoman, we'll be on our way." Regina exhaled sharply, a sound of pure, weary disappointment. "That's it?" Davis hesitated, finally meeting Regina's gaze. "Look, councilwoman, we were just responding to a call." Regina shook her head slowly, the disappointment deepening. "Yeah, you were." She turned back to Jaden, placing a comforting, hand on his shoulder. "Come on, baby, let's go home." Jaden slung his bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the SUV. The officers retreated to their squad car, muttering under their breath, their faces tight with resentment. And Karen? She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, a chill deeper than the evening air seeping into her bones watching them drive away. But for Jaden, for Regina, for every black family who has had to justify their existence in spaces they have every right to occupy, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ride home was silent. Jaden sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, the scene replaying in his mind like a broken record. The flashing lights, the rough hands rummaging through his bag as if he were a common criminal. The way the officers had looked through him, not at him. Regina gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, her knuckles white. She knew this moment was inevitable. She just hadn't expected it to hit so close to home so soon. After a few minutes of heavy silence, she spoke, her voice soft. "You okay, Jaden?" Jaden let out a slow breath, the weight of the encounter settling in. "I don't know, Mom." She nodded, understanding. "I get it." He turned to her, his voice small, vulnerable. "What would have happened if you weren't there?" Regina's stomach clenched. She didn't have an answer, not one she wanted to speak aloud. Instead, she reached over, squeezing his hand, her touch a silent promise of protection. "You did everything right, Jaden." Jaden sighed, the words offering little comfort. "And it still didn't matter." Regina looked at him then, really looked at him. A 16-year-old kid, still sweaty from basketball practice, already carrying the crushing weight of a moment that should never have happened. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this, every kid like him, every parent like her who had to arm their children with survival strategies in a world that saw them as a threat first, a person second. Across Oakwood Estates, Karen sat alone in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to dial 911. The same phone that could have been the reason Jaden never made it home. A sickening twist in her gut. She thought she was being cautious. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, the truth was a bitter pill. She had just been afraid. And for the first time, a question she'd avoided her entire life began to surface. Afraid of what? She looked at the blank screen of her phone, and then, The question she had spent a lifetime suppressing finally broke free. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was her? Ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? How many stories like Jaden's don't end with a parent arriving just in time? And how many times do people like Karen get to walk away, never truly confronting the consequences of their fear? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. It's a reality playing out every single day across America. Maybe it's time we stopped pretending not to see it. Maybe it's time we did something about it. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. Talk about it. Learn from it. Because the next time someone like Karen picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky as Jaden Walker.